We got 69 brand new cards to play with, and I'm gonna be making a lot of decks in the next few weeks. Stay tuned, and without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, starting with Tropius. This is a pretty underwhelming card. It's basic. It does have some flexibility for you to slot into different color decks, but all in all, not really too impressive. Then Leafeon. I think this card is kind of being more overhyped than it deserves, but at the same time, it does look a lot of fun and I could see it working well enough in some situations. I'm gonna put it in situationally great, even though it's maybe a little bit too generous, to be honest. Bounsweet, your typical filler card. Teeny, kind of same thing. Now Tsarina, I think this is definitely very interesting. The effect is potentially very strong, delaying your opponent's game plan, putting cards from their hand into their deck. It's very annoying. The problem is, as a stage 2, it deals too little damage. By the time you have it ready, even if you get a magical start with the rare candy, it just feels like it'll kind of fall behind quite quickly. Even if you put a couple of cards from your opponent's hand into their deck, they might eventually overwhelm Tsarina and they lose a point, and essentially 3 cards just to kind of pull this off. So situationally looks pretty nice, but I don't really think it's gonna be strong enough. I'm just gonna put it in alright. Applin, so when I saw this, I actually thought we were gonna get the dragon line, but unfortunately this is grass, and it's just gonna really be doing something for this Appleton, which is a Sweets Relay synergy card. Appleton in itself is kind of alright. I think in the Sweets Relay cards, it's the one that deals the most base damage. It's 40 plus 30. It's for a total of 70 for only 1 energy, which is really nice. But at the same time, yeah, it's a Sweets Relay. We'll see how strong that really ends up being. I'm gonna put it in the alright, as I think it'll be with the tier where most of the Sweets Relay cards will end up being. Now Flareon, non-EX Flareon. I think this is actually pretty interesting. For a fire card, the ability to ramp your bench outside of something like Moltres comes really in handy. I think this is not as great as it might seem though. 40 damage is very little. This actually reminds me of another card we got in the past, which is this Lilligant. On grass types, it was also dealing 50 damage and ramping one of your benched Pokemon. Flareon is kind of similar, has 10 more HP, 10 less damage. The thing is, Flareon does have a bit more synergy with something like the Eevee bag, for example, but I'm not sure if this will really see a lot of play. It does potentially have some synergy with the Flareon EX as well, so you'll probably want to consider running both in the same deck, but I'm kind of undecided on how good this will really be. I'm kind of gonna put it in the alright tier. It's potentially situationally great, but I think as it stands, I'm not really seeing this becoming amazing or a staple in the meta. Now Flareon EX, I think this card has a lot of potential, but I think it might also be one of those cards that is being a little bit too overhyped. Obviously, the most immediate comparisons we have seen is kind of comparing it with Arcanine EX, which has the same health, pretty much the same damage, 10 less damage, and also deals damage to itself. But Flareon does deal damage to itself on its abilities, so you can deal self-damage and then heal it back before you attack, which is really convenient. But that is also one more card you need to use to pair with it. Another obvious comparison is with Lycanroc EX, which also didn't really see any play. It has the same HP, the same damage, also discards energy. I think the biggest advantage to Flareon though is that you don't really have to invest much energy into it from your energy zone directly. You can kind of just give it the energy that you're discarding throughout the match. You can potentially use this attack without ever giving it any energy manually, just by dealing 60 damage to it. Ultimately, I think you'll want a balance of maybe attaching 1 or 2 energy through the ability and the rest manually. But I think this is kind of trickier to use than people are giving it credit for, needing to pair it with a lot of healing so that you don't deal too much self-damage to it will seem kind of awkward. Let's see where this ends up falling. I would not be surprised if it really is very usable and strong, but it doesn't seem like one of those brainlessly easy to use cards that, as much as people are making it out to seem. I'm gonna put it in the situationally great. even though I'm very eager to really see how this ends up being used the most efficiently. Now Torkoal, as a basic, dealing 70 for 2, it's pretty decent. You do discard the energy, but I could see this being slotted into a few decks, mostly as an anti-Oricorio counter. I'm gonna put it in the alright. Litten, pretty filler. Torracat as well. Incineroar. Now, when I saw this card, I thought this was pretty funny. This is one of the very few cards that we have that can deal like up to 200 damage on a 25% chance of doing so. I think this is kind of funny. If you like coin flips, maybe this card is for you. It could also be interesting to see on Incineroar EX decks as a one-of potentially. I'm not really sure if an Incineroar EX deck would want to run one of these, even if just as an anti-Oricorio counter. Even if just as an Oricorio counter, I think this card is fun, potentially strong. I would probably want to put it in below average. I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt and put it in alright, because on average it'll deal 100 damage, which is pretty respectable. But for 3 energy, we'll probably just want Incineroar EX, which deals 140 and has the additional 1 energy attack. Salandit, filler, and Salazzle, also I think it's kind of filler. We are gonna see a lot of these cards that fall pretty much into the standard baseline stat line that you kind of want, with 1 energy for 40 or 2 energy for 70 as a stage 1. It's respectable, it's alright, but not really worth commenting much on. Now Vaporeon, this is pretty much the grindcore attack from Guzzlord, has 3 energy and with 70 damage. The effect is alright, can be really strong. 70 damage is pretty respectable as well. If this was 2 energy, even with less attack, it would be much better. As it stands, I'm not really seeing many people using this. It's a big energy investment for an uncertain outcome, so I'm kind of gonna put it in the below average. I think it has the potential if it rolls 1 heads or 2, but it's a 50% chance, and I'm not really seeing people want to invest 3 energy on this just to roll the dice, but could potentially be pretty strong, especially with Misty. Now Glaceon, this card looks pretty similar to one we got in the past, which is Luminion. Luminion only attacked benched Pokemon, now Glaceon can attack any Pokemon, so that's considerably better, even though Luminion had a 0 retreat cost. Thing is, I'm not really sure if this stat line cuts it anymore. As an evolution, it does have some synergy with the Eevee bag, and add some additional flexibility to your Eevee decks. By now we have pretty much like 2 different Vaporeons or 3, plus this Glaceon and Glaceon EX, so there's quite a bit of flexibility, and I could see this being useful in some circumstances if you want that added touch of flexibility in some of those decks. But at the end of the day, I don't really think those decks will be particularly viable. Definitely seems quite a lot of fun, but I'm not sure if those decks will be decent enough. I'm just gonna put it in the alright. So Vanillite, I'm gonna put it in the alright as well. Vanillish, it's kind of the same deal, but I'm quite excited to use the Sweets Relay deck with the water synergies specifically. Then Vanillux. It's pretty interesting that Vanillish evolves to something like this. Now at first glance, this card is pretty much exactly like Marowak EX, has the same HP, has the same damage for the same energy cost. It has an added retreat cost of 2 instead of 1, but it's not an EX, although it is a stage 2, so it does require a couple more cards. I think this card looks pretty interesting, especially as an addition to the Sweets Relay decks. It's a way for you to have an added win condition on top of the Alchemy. The effect is going to be pretty random. 25% of the time you're going to deal 0 damage, but 25% of the time you're also dealing 160. So I think this is actually pretty good. I would almost be tempted to put it in situationally great, but I think ultimately it's too much roll of the dice, but I think it might still be used. I really want to put it in situationally great, but I think more realistically it's gonna fall into alright, but I hope I'm wrong and that it's really better than I'm giving it credit for. Now Alomomola, not really impressed with this one. Poplio, another filler. Brion, another filler. And then Primarina EX. Now this card looks pretty amazing. 180 HP is a damn lot, and this card pretty much has 3 attacks. 40 damage for 1, 80 damage for 2, or 100 damage for 3 that also self-heals. The 100 damage for 3 that also self-heals kind of reminds me of Lapras EX, Although Lapras was a basic, not a stage 2, it had a lot less HP. One interesting note is that this would theoretically synergize very well with the non-EX Primarina, so you might want to have both in the same deck. The problem is that's gonna be very inconsistent to actually have both on the board, especially in the right order, where you want Primarina EX in the active spot and the other one in the bench. And the problem is also that you can never have 3 Primarinas on the board at the same time, which would be the ideal scenario, right? With the Primarina EX on the board and then 2 on the bench. That said, this still seems really nice, just because of the flexibility of having potentially the 3 attacks pretty much. I think capping out at 100 damage is also a very potential big downside for this card, compared to other stage 2 EXs out there that are doing a lot of work. Mostly the Charizard, the Incineroar, but even something like Magnezone and Solgaleo all have their own strengths. I'm not sure if Primarina really compares to any of those as much, but being a water type, it really tries to synergize with the healing mechanics and maybe with the leftovers, and even something like, if not the other non-EX Primarina, maybe something like Wigglytuff to help sustain it on the active spot. It could be really interesting, it has a lot of potential. I'm gonna be a little bit generous and put it in situationally great, but we'll see how this really evolves. I think the 1 energy and 2 energy attacks are really nice for this and give it a lot of flexibility depending on how quickly you get this online. Now Jolteon, not gonna lie, I'm not too impressed with this card. I think if you're going first and you already have it in hand and you play it as soon as possible, then it's pretty amazing, because with 60 damage you threaten to take out every basic out there. Some basics do have 70 HP, but threatening to take out your opponent's Litten or Charmander or whatever, it's really strong. But other than that, I'm not really too impressed. If this comes anywhere near mid-game or late game, it's not really gonna do much. So I'm gonna put it in the alright tier. Now Joltik itself doesn't seem too impressive, especially because it has 40 HP only. The fact is that it evolves into Galvantula. Now when I saw this card I was extremely impressed. For 2 energy, you discard the energy, but you guaranteedly paralyze the opponent, besides dealing 70 damage as well. I think this card is amazing, especially because it has a 0 retreat cost. You guarantee to paralyze your opponent, deal 70 damage, and then you can kind of retreat back to whatever else you have energy on to deal more damage to that paralyzed opponent. Even though that's a bit of a situational scenario, because you do need to have another Pokemon with energy ready to attack after Galvantula, or you can try one of those Dawn shenanigans like Zeraora with Dawn to put Galvantula ready to attack one more time. And you also don't really want to lead a match with the Joltik into Galvantula, because then you'll lose all of your energy, and maybe even if you take 1 point, you may be kind of falling behind after that. And also another potential downside is just healing the paralysis with something like Pokemon Center Lady. So I think this is situationally great. I see a lot of potential in this card, but it's very situational at the end of the day. Now Espeon. Espeon has been one of the most hyped cards for this set, and I think deservedly so. It does have a lot of potential, a lot of damage. Espeon is pretty much like Tapu Lele, it's very similar, except that it deals more damage because it also counts the energy attached to all of your other opponent's Pokemon, not just the energy attached to the Pokemon that you're attacking. That said, I think this will kind of be a staple in a lot of decks, especially Evolution decks. It pairs really nicely with Sylveon EX as well. I'm not really sure if it really is meta-defining potential. Because it is a stage 1, I think it's not as flexible as something like Tapu Lele, which is much easier to slot into a lot of decks. So I'm gonna put it in situationally great, even though it does have some S tier potential of defining the meta. It can be very strong against a Darkrai Giratina deck, for example, that ramps a lot of energy very quickly. So I do think it's gonna be kind of putting some decks in check, but at the end of the day, I think it's a bit situational still. Woobat is pretty much a filler, same for Swoobat. Swirlix, another cute Sweets Relay card that uses colorless energy, and Slurpuff, it's the same thing. It can deal 90 damage for 2, which is really interesting. So you might disagree with this one, but just because I want to believe in the Sweets Relay meta, I'm gonna put it in situationally great. I really think this has a lot of potential. At 120 HP, it can also survive the likes of Silvally. At the end of the day, I think A tier is probably a little too generous for it, but it does seem really interesting, really fun, and it's a colorless energy, so it will fit into all Sweets Relay decks. Now, non-EX Sylveon. If you have one evolution on the bench, it deals 70, with 2 evolutions on the bench, it deals 100, and with 3, it deals 130. For 2 energy, dealing 70 damage is decent, 100 damage is really good, and 130 is amazing. But all of those conditions are very situational. You'll not only need evolutions on the bench, but also on Sylveon itself in the active spot. So I'm not really too impressed with this one. It can be excellent, but also very situational. And at the end of the day, 90 HP isn't really much or enough to survive a lot of the attacks in response. Now, Sylveon EX, also a very hyped card for this set, and I think very deservedly so. Its ability, when you play this card to evolve your Eevee, you draw 2 cards, so basically just like playing a free Professor's Research, which is considered the best card in the game. What hasn't been said enough about this card though is that I think it's probably gonna be played outside of Psychic decks as well. As long as you have an evolution deck, whatever the color it is, you can kinda slot in a Sylveon, and I think it's gonna do some work. Whether you have 3 EVs or 4 EVs, you're probably gonna have one of them that isn't really doing much. And for that one, you can always put a Sylveon, draw more cards. In that regard, I think this card can be kinda comparable to Shiinotic. Shiinotic can draw you like 2, 3, 4 cards in a single match, which is excellent. Sylveon kinda does the same. It is a higher risk card because as an EX, it's not as flexible, I would say, and you might be trapped with it in the axis spot when you don't want to. And even if it takes a sliver of damage, it becomes Sire's bait. But Shiinotic only draws Pokemon, and Sylveon can help draw just about anything that you have in the deck. It can get you to other cards like your Pokemon tools or your Eevee bags. I see this card as having huge potential, maybe the most potential out of this entire set. I think it'll have a must-have 2 of for every Eevee Psychic deck at least, but even outside of Psychic, I wouldn't be surprised to see it at all. So I think this is gonna be the first card that I'm gonna put it in meta-defining potential. Now moving over to Mimikyu. This card looks so fun. For 2 energy, you can choose 1 attack from your opponent's active Pokemon and use it on a 50% chance. This can be amazing to just keep on your bench. When your opponent brings out their Incineroar EX or even their Dragonite EX, you can just come in and try to replicate it and take it down as well. Now the problem is this is on a coin flip, so there's no guarantee that this will actually do anything, and because of that, I think it's only really about in the alright, maybe even in the below average, probably in the below average. I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt because it does have a lot of potential when it rolls heads, but this is more of a fun card than anything else. Now Milcery, just gonna put the other Sweets Relay in the alright, and then Alchemy, so the cherry on top, no pun intended, of the Sweets Relay decks. It'll be dealing 40 damage for every time you use Sweets Relay during the match. Now that we've seen all of the Sweets Relay cards, I think this will have a lot of potential. Now, only having 80 HP really brings it down, because even if this is guaranteed to knock out just about anything, it will definitely be knocked out in response as well. But maybe sometimes that's enough. You know, even against something like Incineroar EX, which can take a little while to get online, you just have to attack it like 3 times with Sweets Relays, and then you bring out a Sweets Overload that deals 120. That can be pretty strong, so I'm really eager to try out this card. I think ultimately this will just end up falling more into a fun deck category, but at the same time I really hope not, and I really hope this is kind of viable because it looks so fun to use Sweets Relay decks for just about any color that supports them well enough. I'm gonna put it in the situationally great, just being a little generous as well. Firepoach, just a filler card. So Wishcash, for 4 energy, deals 130 but also deals 10 damage to your benched Pokemon. I think this card is kinda interesting, as a stage 1 dealing 130 damage can be pretty decent, but it is a very high attack cost. Maybe with something like Passimian EX, you can actually quite quickly ramp this up. Retreat cost of 3 is pretty high. I think what's interesting about this is that eventually this might actually become better once we get cards that have synergy with wanting to take damage. So imagine something like Incineroar EX, but for fighting types. This Wishcash can kinda help it set up. But at the same time, the problem is it requires 4 energy, and even if you try to use something like Passimian, that means you can't really afford to lose anything else after Whiscash. So I'm a bit torn on this. I want to like it and I want to see its future potential, but I think it's just a bit too awkward to use. For the amount of energy it wants, it has too little HP, so I think this will end up being not really too usable. I'm gonna put it in the below average, but I could see it becoming a little bit better eventually. Mienfoo, I'm just gonna put it in a filler. Mienshao, this is kind of same thing as well. This is kind of like a Sandslash, but with a 1 less retreat cost. I do like 70 damage for 2 energy, I think it's solid. But the problem is, stage 1s with less than 110 HP or so are becoming really difficult to use, especially because of Silvally, but also because Rare Candy and stage 2s just kind of delete them. So I'm gonna put it in the filler. And Carbing, I quite like this type of effect, but dealing only 30 damage for 2 is really underwhelming. You're better off just using something like Dugtrio, for example, that deals 40 for 1 with the same effect. So I'm gonna put it in the below average. Now Umbreon actually looks pretty darn amazing. I think this card has so much potential. I am almost tempted to put it in meta-defining potential because against something like Darkrai Giratina or even like Snorlax Giratina or whatnot, this card can be devastating. The problem is, against other types of decks, like Silvally Rampardos or any type of stage 2 deck with Charizard or Incineroar, it's not really doing anything at all against those. Well, I guess it's dealing 40 damage for 1, which is not too bad, but it just feels too situational. It's not the kind of card that will be absolutely amazing in every single matchup. When it is amazing, it'll be incredible. But because it's a bit situational, I'm just gonna put it in the situationally great tier. Now Sableye, it's pretty much a filler. Purloin, discarding tools from your opponent's active Pokemon. It's kind of like the Starly that we had before. Now Purloin, discarding tools from your opponent's active Pokemon. It's pretty much like the Starly that we had before, but it does have 10 more HP at the cost of not dealing any damage. I'm just gonna put it in the filler. And Leopards, dealing 70 damage for 2, kind of another standard baseline stats. I'm gonna put it in the filler as well. Now Mawile, Paralysis is an extremely strong status effect, but being on a coin flip and 2 energy for only 30 damage is very underwhelming. This could potentially be nice when it rolls heads, but otherwise not really impressive. I'm just gonna put it in the below average. Now Togedemaru, as a basic 80 HP for 2 energy, deals 30 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon is damaged by an attack, deal 30 damage to the attacking Pokemon. So this is kind of like the Alolan Sandslash effect, deals 10 more damage, but also deals 10 less damage on the Retribution effect. It is a basic instead of a stage 1. I think this card could have a little potential. When it especially shines is the fact that it can also be combined with Sophocles to deal 30 more damage. So essentially 60 damage for 2, with also the Retribution effect. Then it becomes actually pretty good. I'm not too impressed still. I could see people wanting to use this, but because Sophocles kind of just wants lightning Pokemon on the other Pokemon that it synergizes with, I don't really see this becoming too usable, especially because it wants 2 metal energy, so you can't really put it into a dual energy with lightning. So this feels pretty underwhelming. I'm gonna put it in the below average. Meltan, just a filler. Melmetal, not too impressive. 140 HP is pretty good. I think I end up preferring the previous Melmetal that we had. I'm just gonna put it in the below average. Now Dratini is a filler. Dragonair is a filler as well, although I arguably say it's kind of better than the previous Dragonair that we had. The previous Dragonair can deal 80 damage for 3 energy. I think I would slightly prefer the new Dragonair just being able to attack for 1 less energy, but it does require this dual energy still. And then Dragonite EX. This card actually seems pretty decent. For 3 energy, dealing 180 damage is massive. That's pretty much enough to knock out everything out there, especially if you have Guzma to try to take out the Giant Cape from the likes of Solgaleo and cards that want to get out of that 180 HP range. Another thing going for this is that with 180 HP, you're also almost definitely likely to survive 1 attack from just about anything. So you come in with your Dragonite EX, you deal 180, then even if you can't attack your next turn, you survive just about any attack, and then you get to attack again and take out another Pokemon. And I think what's most interesting about this is the potential to combine it with the non-EX Dragonite in the same deck. So you will have some flexibility on whether you want to go for the regular Dragonite or the Dragonite EX. Now, using both in the same deck will probably be too situational. It requires a total of 7 energy, both of which want the dual energy between lightning and water as well. But I could see this being usable. This seems really darn strong. I'm gonna put it in situationally great, even though it has some very clear downsides. I think it has so much potential in terms of just knocking out just about any 2 Pokemon as soon as it enters the game. My main gripe with Dragon types is just the dual energy inconsistency. A lot of the times you might get 4 or 5 of the same energy in a row, but when it works, this kind is gonna be pretty good. And finally, for Dragon types, Drampa, for 2 energy, you either do absolutely nothing or you deal 70 damage and paralyze the opponent's Pokemon. This is a huge variance card. 70 damage plus paralysis is really darn strong and has colorless energy, so it can fit in just about anything. But 50% of the time doing nothing, that's really rough. I'm gonna be kinda generous and put it in alright, just because the effect can be so strong 50% of the time. Now, the new non-EX Eevee, 1 energy, you draw a card. This effect isn't particularly new, we had already seen this in other basics, right, like Sigilyph or Meowth. The thing is, Eevee is a lot more flexible than those cards and has more synergy with cards like Eevee Bag, so I quite like this is really flexible. I'm not sure if at the end of the day this is the best Eevee out there. I could see some Eevee decks actually wanting the damaging Eevees just to apply even more pressure if they're more aggro. But I think for the most part, this will be the Eevee that most decks will want. It's a really good card. The fact that it can evolve into just about any evolution seems really great. Because it is more flexible than Sigilyph or Meowth and whatnot, I'm gonna put it in situationally great actually. Now Eevee EX. I'm honestly not very impressed with this one. I think I kind of prefer the non-EX Eevee that draws a card now. Obviously, this is a pretty good stat line for a basic, 90 HP, 30 damage for 1. But if there's any chance that you don't actually get or draw your evolutions soon enough, and this Eevee takes damage and then becomes Cyrus bait before you even get to evolve it, it becomes really high risk. I think it's still gonna be used a damn lot, but it's not gonna be a very incredible card, and I think a lot of the time you're actually going to be relieved when you finally evolve this and get it out of the board essentially. So it's really good as a starter leading up to your evolutions, but in some situations where you don't draw your evolution fast enough, this card can become a liability. Because of that, I'm actually going to put it in the alright tier, but obviously it can become situationally great a lot of the time as well. Now Snorlax EX, 160 HP. This ability is pretty good. At the end of your turn, you heal 20 damage from it. You can combine it with the new Leftovers cards and you heal 30 damage from it. And then for 4 energy, it deals 130 and becomes asleep. The becoming asleep isn't too bad because at the end of your turn, you flip a coin. At the end of your opponent's turn, you flip another coin. So you pretty much have a 75% chance of waking up by the time it's your turn again. And even if you don't, you have cards like Pokemon Center Lady or Big Malasada or whatnot to wake it up. Also important to note that it does not work with Berry. Berry only affects non-EX Snorlax, not Snorlax EX. This could be combined with something like Wigglytuff to also heal it by 20 every turn. And it's also kind of comparable to something like Bibarel EX, which also for 4 energy deals 100 damage and also has some healing synergies. I'm not too impressed with this card, but I'm very excited to use it, especially because of synergy with Ilima. Right, for 160 HP, that's a very high amount of HP for a basic, and then you can just tank a lot of damage, use Ilima and put it back on your bench, use whatever you had been putting energy on to stall for a while you start ramping up this guy on the bench. Then has some interesting potential. I don't really see it being better than below average, to be completely honest, but I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt. It does seem quite fun. I'm definitely gonna use it, but I'm gonna put it in the alright tier. It's maybe a little bit generous, but that's fine. Now Ipom, I'm gonna put it in filler. And Ambipom. New ability, Catching Tail. Once during your turn, you may put a random Pokemon tool card from your deck into your hand. So this is kind of like Shiinotic for Pokemon tools. All of these types of effects that draw cards from your deck into your hand directly are extremely strong. They thin out your deck and make it more consistent to draw everything else. The problem is, this requires pretty much 2 or 4 cards, your iPalms and Nabipalms, and then you probably want to run like 4 Pokemon tools with this deck, so maybe something like a Skarmory deck could maybe want an Ambipom. But yeah, this is a theoretically strong effect, but unfortunately, Pokemon tools are not really the kind of card you want to have a lot of in your deck. Especially because if you are relying on a lot of Pokemon tools, then you are very much countered by Guzmas, so this card will be pretty awkward to use. I'm also gonna give it the benefit of the doubt and put it in alright because it does have some potential, especially moving forward. It can eventually become better and better, but it's honestly speaking more realistically more in the below average tier. I don't really see it being very used, but I hope I'm wrong, to be honest. Now Chatot, not really impressed at all. I'm just gonna put it in filler. Same with Audino, it's a very underwhelming ability. Same with Minccino, same with Chinchino. Squavet, not looking too good either. And then Greedent, 120 HP for a stage 1. For 3 energy, you deal 50 damage or 100 if you have a Pokemon tool. 100 damage for 3 energy on a colorless attack is not too bad. It does require the Pokemon tool, which can also be tolerable. I kinda like this card, but I think generally you'll just want to put 3 energy on something else that is more consistent, reliable, and powerful. This could have some decent potential, but as a stage 1, I don't really think it's worth the deck slots, especially for how strongly it is countered by Guzma. So I'm gonna put it in the below average. It's maybe a little bit better than that. Now Eevee Bag, our first choose one card. As an item, you can either use it to act as a Giovanni for your evolutions, or you can heal 20 from all of your evolutions, so like a mega potion for a lot of Pokemon at the same time. This card looks pretty incredible for evolution decks. I think it's a bit more situational than people give it credit for, but I still think it's very strong, especially the first choice of acting as a Giovanni, which can then be paired with an actual Giovanni or a red to buff a lot of damage at once. I'm really excited about this card. The only thing is it's only usable for evolutions, but I think that's completely fine and balanced. I'm gonna put it in situationally great, just because it is very strong for those decks. But even those decks have kind of a cap of how strong they can really become, even with an Eevee Bag on top. Now Leftovers, our new Pokemon tool. At the end of your turn, you heal 10 damage from your active Pokemon. This can be pretty darn good. I don't think it's necessarily going to be used above something like a Giant Cape, but I think some Pokemon will actually prefer this. I'm very interested to seeing which combinations this is really used on. I'm going to put it in situationally great because I think it's going to be pretty amazing on some Pokemon, but not necessarily going to be shaking up the meta and going to be used above the other tools that we already have. Still think Giant Cape is probably better than this a lot of the time, but I could see some stage 2s Pokemons wanting this, or especially those Pokemon that also have other synergies with healing, like the Snorlax or the Primarina, stuff like that. Now how? During this turn, attacks used by your Decidueye EX, Incineroar EX or Primarina EX do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So this looks pretty darn amazing. I don't think Decidueye EX or Incineroar EX needed a buff, so I'm a bit surprised to see this. This is pretty darn good for those decks. So I'm gonna put it in situationally great. Can also be arguably decent for Primarina, to correct the main downside that I mentioned earlier, which is the fact that it doesn't have a lot of damage for a stage 2 compared to other options. But it's like something in between Giovanni and Cynthia, for example. Has pretty decent potential. I don't really see it being more than a one-off for those decks, because it only really affects those EXs, and you really have to go through a lot of card pieces in order to reach that moment where you really want to use this card. Can be pretty darn amazing, especially as a finisher. You know, allowing your Incineroar EX to deal 170 damage is huge. So yeah, this looks pretty solid. And lastly, Penny. Look at a random supporter card that's not Penny from your opponent's deck and essentially use the effect of that card as the effect of this one. This is gonna be pretty darn random for the most part. Obviously, the best case scenario is when you copy something like Professor's Research and you end up drawing 2 cards for free, essentially having 3 Professor's Research in your own deck. but generally speaking, it's way too random and a lot of the times it won't do anything at all. Like if you copy Guzma and your opponent doesn't have tools, if you copy Lusamine and you don't have any discarded energy or any Ultra Beasts, if you copy Cyrus and your opponent doesn't have any damaged Pokemon, it's pretty awkward. Not really gonna do a lot of the time, but sometimes it can be pretty darn amazing. Even if it copies something like Sabrina, it can be really darn annoying. But also sometimes copying something like Sabrina can also be bad if you did want to attack the opponent's active. So it's way out of your control, but looks pretty fun. I'm gonna give it a try anyway, and I'm excited to get my hands dirty with it. So that's it for the tier list. I'm excited to play with a lot of these cards. Let me know what you think of this. Do you agree? Do you disagree with a lot of these placements here? Again, as the obvious disclaimer, this is only the first day of this set. I myself haven't really even played with any of these cards, so this is merely first impressions. And obviously, a lot of these assessments are gonna be wrong. It's the first day, don't blame me too much. Most of all, I just like going through this exercise of trying to rate these cards, seeing how good or bad they're gonna be. Even though we have no real basis for really rating these cards, especially without any hands-on experience, and the meta is gonna take a while to settle. But at the end of the day, I'm quite interested in your opinion as well. A few weeks from now, we can kind of look back and see how right or wrong I was with these first assessments. So again, let me know if you would have rated any of these cards differently, if you think I've overrated or underrated any of these cards. I take deck requests, so is there any of these cards that you really want to see played in ranked? Let me know in the comments and I'll build a deck around it. I'll be focusing on and uploading fun of meta decks throughout the next few weeks. And as always, thank you for watching and I'll see you on the next one.